No, can you hear me though?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All
Yeah.
right. Okay, well, out of respect for everybody's time, we'll convene the joint workshop between the West Des Moines Waterworks Board of Trustees and the City Council of West Des Moines. We appreciate the Waterworks Board of Trustees asking us to this meeting. I guess a little bit of overview for me, and then I'll turn it over to Scott as the Waterworks Board of Trustees chair for some opening comments, and then I know we have a presentation that you'd like to share with us. But I guess this issue started maybe in 2017 when there was a group convened that I was asked to chair. We spent maybe 18 months talking about potential issues. We ended that 18 months with really no progress. We had a chance to talk a lot about issues and share thoughts, concerns, potential solutions, but I think starting maybe in 2019, it was the West Des Moines Waterworks Committee, the Des Moines Waterworks Committee, and the Urbandale Waterworks Committee, the independent boards who've been meeting. And so we've known over the last few years that you all have been meeting. We haven't been involved in any of those meetings. We would get periodic updates. Jody would share a little bit with us on how things were going, but it was work that you all were putting in, and I know there was a lot of hours put in, a lot of discussion, and we're anxious to see the information that you want to share. So my thoughts would be after Scott's opening comments. I think Christina's got a PowerPoint she wants to go through, and I guess I would ask the council, and I violate this more than anybody else, to hold our questions until maybe she's done, because I think oftentimes we ask something in anticipation and it'll be answered in a couple slides. So we'll take our notes, we'll keep our questions until you guys have completed your presentation. Like to get the City Council's questions out on the table and responded to. And then when we're all done with those conversations, we're happy to open the floor up to anyone here in the public that wants to ask a question or share their thoughts. I know there are 2 more public hearings that the West Des Moines Waterworks Board of Trustees are going to have on this issue, so there'll be at least 2 other opportunities for people to ask questions and to participate in the conversation. So tonight's not it. The real purpose of tonight, I think, was just to share with us the work that's done, what your thoughts are, maybe some preliminary recommendations, and just ask the council if they have any questions. Again, I mean, we're all on the same team, and our community looks to all of us on a combined basis to provide the services that they're expecting, which obviously includes water, and all of our new development can't occur without that. So we appreciate being all on the same team. I think we know each other very well, and so with that, Scott, we'd be happy to have any opening thoughts or comments, and then if you want to turn it over to Christina, that'd be great as well.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Brennan. I'm the chair of the Water Board of Trustees. And with me tonight are Gretchen Tegler, who's the vice chair, Jody Smith, who's a trustee, Mary Thompson, who's a trustee, and Aaron Sheriff, who's a trustee. And on behalf of the board, we appreciate the opportunity to share with you and the council the options that the Board of Trustees have been evaluating regarding the critical future water needs of the city of West Des Moines. And we recognize this topic is of great interest to both the council and to our thousands of ratepayers. Yet ultimately this is a decision for this board alone. We are proud residents of West Des Moines, but the council has not provided input or guidance in regard to our upcoming decision. This works out as essentially to kick off the start of our outreach to our ratepayers, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in the days, weeks, and months ahead. Deciding on our path forward will require attention to detail and consideration of the impact that water has on our communities, continued strong economic development, and the ratepayers that make West Des Moines their great home. We must act in order to ensure that our future water needs will be met when we need them. How we make this happen is what we're here to talk about tonight. Before we get started, I want to personally thank those who put in so much time and effort related to this process. My predecessors as chair, Karen Novak Swalwell and Brian Rickert, who's here tonight. Also, thanks to my fellow trustees, I can guarantee that Gretchen, Mary, and Aaron had no idea what they were signing up for. And in particular, I want to thank Trustee Jody Smith and General Manager Christina Murphy. They've done enormous work in getting us to the point where we can discuss the concept of regionalization thoughtfully. And finally, I want to thank the great staff at West Des Moines Waterworks. They do great work every day on behalf of the citizens of West Des Moines. And with that, Christina, she has a presentation to share with us on the background and the options that the Board of Trustees has been considering.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Oh, you want to?
You want me to help get
Yep.
that set up?
Yeah, reminder. Got shared.
That's,
Perfect, thank you.
thank you.
All righty. I'm not in my home territory, so thanks for the assistance.
Sure.
Good evening, welcome. My name's Christina Murphy. As Scott mentioned, I'm the general manager of West Des Moines Waterworks. And as Scott shared, we are appreciative of the opportunity to share these options with the City Council. These are the options that the Board of Trustees have spent many hours and many discussions evaluating our future water needs at West Des Moines. We're definitely here tonight to talk about water. It's one of the most important and one of the most taken for granted resources our community has. You turn on your faucet and it flows. When it doesn't, you call us and we'll take care of it. And so we don't want to wait until the time comes where we haven't done enough planning and the water isn't there. And so tonight is about making those future steps to make sure that we have the water available. All right, we're going to start with who are we? I know many of you are knowledgeable about how the waterworks operates, but I want to make sure everyone here tonight has the same background. The waterworks started in 1950 with 3 trustees and expanded to 5 in 1982. Our trustees are appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council, and they act independently in accordance with the state statute and provide policies and direction for the decision of the water utility. We are funded through water revenues and water rates, not taxes, as sometimes people think. We have a staff of 39 that manage our production, distribution, our engineering and capital improvements projects, our finances, our customer service, and billing. Oh, there we go. Oh. Pretty sure it's advancing.
Buddy, Roberto, could one of you help quick?
The click didn't work, sorry.
I don't know if I can help. I'm not sure why there's, is it because there's 2 open?
Maybe.
I'm not sure what the issue is, but it's, this screen is just displaying this. It's frozen.
I have to restart it here. It's frozen. Can we restart it?
I think the USB drive is still in
Yeah,
there, right?
it is.
Okay.
And maybe stop sharing and restart sharing.
Yep. We'll do that here next. Let me make sure.
Make sure it's on the right thing.
Teams.
Yeah, there's 2
There's
teams
2.
meeting.
See that?
That could be why.
I'm not seeing the sharing part. Let's just open it up. Is it here?
Yeah.
Okay. Just reboot it.
So then hit show, I think.
Yeah, just start the slideshow. I think it's on the right thing.
Where is it here? Yeah, I'll let you try. Pieces again. There it is.
There we go. All right. Like I said, I wasn't on home territory, so we'll keep going here. Okay, we talked about who we are. So next, or not. There we go. Found a way. I'm going to provide a little background on how we currently serve our customers. This becomes important as we consider future water supply options. AC Ward is a 10 million gallon per day lime softening plant that uses a combination of shallow wells and deep Jordan aquifer wells. AC Ward serves zones 1 and 2, which are the dark and light green zones. While AC Ward manages the needs of zones 1 and 2 most of the year, during high usage times, we often need to use water bought from Des Moines Waterworks to supplement those two zones. We have 9 million gallons per day in purchase capacity from Des Moines Waterworks and a 3 million gallon per day ASR, or Aquifer Storage and Recovery credit, for water used in the south zone only. That's the red area. What do I mean by purchase capacity? So purchase capacity is our wholesale contract in which we committed upfront capital funds in order to buy down the cost of water that we purchase from Des Moines Waterworks. We average about 6.5 to 7 million gallons per day, and in the summer, during peak usage, we double that. We currently purchase about 30% of our water from Des Moines Waterworks, and that serves zones 3, 4, and the south zone exclusively. So from the map, you can see we have a lot of future growth that's going to happen in the south zone and zone 4. The other zones are either built out or getting close to it, and that'll be important as part of our discussion later on. All right. What should our path forward be? So West Des Moines Waterworks has been exploring and discussing their path forward for a number of years, even decades. It's important, no matter the path chosen, that we move forward so there's ample time to have water where we want it, when we want it, and when we need it to be there. So providing water is more than just what you can treat. It's a puzzle, and there are many pieces to it. There's source water quantity and quality. There's your treatment plant capacity, your pumping, and main capacity to get the water where it needs to go. But before we talk about paths forward, I just want to talk a little bit about where we've been. So this slide's about the history, the long-standing history of collaboration with Des Moines Waterworks and West Des Moines Waterworks. West Des Moines Waterworks has worked alongside Des Moines Waterworks and Urbandale to expand a feeder main and the Louise P. Moon booster station. That happened in our history. We also have contributed capital contributions, as I mentioned, to gain purchase capacity. Our current tower on the 98th Street is shared by Clive, West Des Moines Waterworks, and Waukee, and this definitely benefited Des Moines Waterworks. Des Moines Waterworks has been supportive of us on several economic development projects in recent years. While the road has been bumpy at times, I think we can successfully say that we can and have worked together in both Des Moines Waterworks and other communities for the benefit of our ratepayers. Okay. So the history. First up, and the mayor alluded to this, but there was a CERDWAC, a Central Iowa Drinking Water Commission, that was formed through a 28E back in the early 2000s. But in 2014, they commissioned Black & Veatch to look at a regional governance feasibility study. Through that, financial and technical advisory committees were formed to look at more specific discussions about regionalization. Then FCS was hired by Des Moines Waterworks, Urbandale, and West Des Moines Waterworks to help facilitate discussion. West Des Moines Waterworks at that same time was actually pursuing options for source water at a West Regional plant in 2017. If you recall, there was legislative pressure, and in 2018, Des Moines Waterworks presented an initial proposal for regionalization. There were certainly a lot of discussions. Those discussions stalled in 2018. So Des Moines Waterworks in 2019 in the fall presented what they called phase 2, or the term sheet proposal. And that was for all over the suburbs to consider. At the same time, West Des Moines Waterworks went in with several other western suburbs to look at a high-level feasibility study for a West Metro regionalization. West Des Moines Waterworks, along with others, provided comments on Des Moines' proposal, and we met one time in 2020, and then the pandemic happened, right? And so making it really difficult to meet in very large settings. And at that time, utilities were focused on making sure that we could continue to serve water in a public health crisis. But in mid-2021, the microgroup discussions, or there was a decision to try and get together the 3 board-governed utilities to see if we could move some of these big items forward in what we call the microgroup. And that pursued, I think, we reported out the end of 2021, or 2020, and then continued through 2021, and we did reach consensus in 2021. And, all right. We're gonna move this, maybe. All right, options for future water supply needs. So the 3 options that we have considered is full regionalization and the formation of a new regional water utility, Central Iowa Waterworks, is what you've heard in the news. And that's with Des Moines Waterworks and suburban communities. We have a West Regional Plant with Waukee and Van Meter, and then this broader West Metro regionalization study. So option 1 is the full regionalization. You might be wondering if this is different or the same as the Metro Wastewater Reclamation Authority, or the WRA. It's a little different. WRA has 1 treatment plant. WRA had federal dollars to participate and build all new assets, and they were also being driven by new regulations at the time. While different, the WRA is a great example of how metro communities have come together. In the case of this proposed water regionalization, it's shared production of all of our drinking water. That includes our source water, that's 21 wells, transmission main to bring it to the plant, AC Ward. Des Moines Waterworks production assets are also included, along with the core network and shared pumping. All participating members will still own their own distribution systems and set rate for their customers. So over the next several slides, I'm going to hit the highlights of this outcomes document. That was published by the microgroup. This was the focus group made up of Des Moines Waterworks, West Des Moines Waterworks, and Urbandale. If you take a look through this document, you can see that there were hundreds of hours spent on the effort by those that specialize in water and only in water. The group met often, even sometimes several times a week, to see if we could move on some of the major issues that have stalled to date. No matter the decision, our constituents should celebrate that we've been able to sit down together, sometimes with very different viewpoints, and challenge each other's preconceived positions and have tough and sometimes contentious conversations and find middle ground and consensus. You might be wondering, how come just West Des Moines Waterworks, Urbandale, and Des Moines Waterworks? That wasn't the plan originally, but COVID happened, making large meetings really impossible. And I think we can all agree that Zoom meetings with large amounts of folks trying to work through the nitty-gritty, well, we'd probably still be meeting, right? So this doesn't mean that the other communities were excluded. Points of contact for suburban communities were kept in the loop through this document, updated presentations via Zoom, weekly updates, and numerous conversations. All right, so here's the highlights. Shared governance. So currently, West Des Moines Waterworks has no say or full knowledge in the decisions of Des Moines Waterworks. Under regionalization, all water would come from Central Iowa Waterworks. Governing board members would have 1 vote. Des Moines Waterworks would receive 2 votes since they represent a population greater than 100,000 people. Any entity that reaches 100,000 people will gain a second member. Right now, that's only Des Moines Waterworks. A weighted vote can be called for specific categories. These are significant votes, such as rates, long-range plans. In a weighted vote, West Des Moines Waterworks would have 14% of the total vote. Des Moines Waterworks would have 39%, so they could not reach a majority on their own. That worked better when I had a different screen. All right, so asset transfer. So an asset transfer will take place within 5 years. The value of the asset is based on the book value. And since Des Moines Waterworks and West Des Moines Waterworks don't have the same depreciation schedules, this was reconciled to the same exact depreciation schedule for the purposes of asset transfer. We wanted an apples to apples comparison. If there were other water production assets that were going to come to the table, this exercise would need to be done for them as well. Each owner receives credit for the purchase capacity that they own, and all communities either buy in or buy out based on the assets contributed. A method also was determined on how to handle existing debt, if there is going to be existing debt that will be transferred. All right. The next high-level point is how to handle growth, and that's been a point of a lot of discussion. In the original proposal from Des Moines, it was that if you were growing, the growing community should pay all the cost. If you've ever been part of a plant expansion, which probably Larry might be part of that group, you know that when you do a plant expansion, you have to tackle the mechanical, the electrical, the structural systems. You have to bring them up to speed with current regulatory requirements. And so when that happens on a plant expansion, the people that are served by that plant, even if they're not growing, benefit from that expansion. And so that's the philosophy behind this, those benefit paid for benefit. So 91% of the system's expansion costs will be paid by those that need the additional system capacity. 9% will be shared by everyone based on your usage. I've got some examples here. So if Saylorville Water Plant was expanded in the future under a regional model and West Des Moines Waterworks doesn't get water from Saylorville, it would still be responsible for the proportion of the 9% of the costs needed, whether we needed water or not. So there's buy-in there. Conversely, if we decided to expand AC Ward and it only serves West Des Moines right now, all the other communities would contribute 9% to AC Ward if all of that was for growth that happened at AC Ward. Okay, and the approval process. So right now we prepare one CIP and one operating budget, but a separate CIP and operating budget would have to be prepared for the water production assets and go to the regional board to be approved. One assurance that we've put into the proposal is that if a needs assessment or a facility plan has been completed by a licensed engineer, the regional board will support and fund it. This provides assurance to us. It frankly provides assurance to Des Moines Waterworks that assets will be maintained in good working order in order to continue to treat water to all federal and state standards. Okay, a few more key points. Just because they're small does not mean they're not important here. So third-party fiduciary. This is really important to the suburbs so that we could have transparency and confidence in the allocation of costs. Peaking rates. If you don't know what peaking is the ratio of water you use in the summer to the winter. And there are some that believe that if you have a high peaking ratio, you should be penalized for that. But what the deciding part was of this microgroup was that the regional board would decide if a peaking goal makes sense for the region. The operating contract. This is significant for West Des Moines Waterworks. It's an operating contract for the first 20 years. Our employees will remain Waterworks employees. They'll retain their benefits through West Des Moines Waterworks. They will still be represented by their same union. Their day-to-day lives will not change, minus maybe sometimes tracking their time. They will still continue to do the outstanding job of treating drinking water and serving our customers. And the last point on here is long-range planning. So within 1 year, a new long-range plan will be put together that outlines the necessary steps to get water to West Des Moines and the other suburbs when it's projected to be needed. So those are the highlights of regionalization. If you want more detail, there are a few copies over there. You can find this outcomes report on our website. It was recently updated with just the last remaining items. So you can go through that with a fine-tooth comb and call me with questions. All right? So next option that the board has considered is a West Regional Plant. So a West Regional Plant is an 8 MGD to start, state-of-the-art reverse osmosis facility near Van Meter using alluvial or shallow resources initially. It would serve West Des Moines Waterworks and Van Meter and potentially Waukee as a wholesale customer. We would continue to purchase water from Des Moines through 2045. The 8 MGD state-of-the-art plant is estimated to cost $100 million. And that was before the pandemic. So those prices, all things, as you know, are continuing to go up. After 2045, West Des Moines Waterworks would either continue to purchase water from Des Moines or expand enough to produce 100% of its needs. That decision is not being made at this time. Okay. Water quantity considerations. So on August 6, 2020, West Des Moines Waterworks received their water withdrawal permit. While this permit was appealed, we were able to reach a settlement with Des Moines Waterworks that primarily focusing on bullet number 3. The permit allows for 12 million gallons per day in source water from 2 new well fields. However, there's restrictions on this permit. When the 63rd Street gauge, the USGS gauge, hits 114 CFS, we have to reduce from 12 MGD, we lose 75% of our source water capacity, down to 2.88 MGD. It also requires in the permit that if we hit 10 CFS at any of the gauge that you see listed, we have to go to 0. So no source water unless we drill or do other things for source water. We're required to have a backup supply plan to meet average day demands. That threshold can be met with purchase capacity and the expansion of sources in the future. However, it is possible that we would be required to call for conservation more often in times of drought, especially as our demands grow. So this graph is kind of just a frequency of how often we see 114 CFS. We're using the Van Meter gauge instead of the 63rd Street gauge because the Van Meter gauge has been there for over 100 years. So very good history. You can see a lot of our times that we've dropped below 114 CFS have actually happened not during the summer, during our peak times. But you can't ignore the fact that there's plenty of days there in which we have drought during the summer, and we would be restricted in the source water that we could take without going to quarries or Jordan wells, or something that was not tied to the river. Just so you can note, it says 2020, but not included in there is 9 days this summer. We've been in drought this summer. 9 days we've dropped below 114 CFS. Okay, option 3. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because we've not really carried it through, but we did look at it. This is the regionalization of the West Metro suburbs. It also included DeSoto and Adel, basically continuing to use our purchase capacity, but how could we use a new plant at Urbandale and this West plant and serve the West Metro communities? What we found is it was feasible, but at a significant cost, more than these 2 other options. And the same issues as far as regionalizing and trying to figure that out all still applied. So we didn't move it any further at that time. Okay, so non-financial considerations. So as the board have been reviewing this, obviously the financial parts of it matter, but so do the non-financials. So when it comes to regionalization, economies of scale. There are certainly economies of scale if we regionalize at a large scale. If we build a plant and Urbandale pursues a plant, instead of all sharing in centralized plant expansions, there is some loss of economies of scale if we don't do it at a large scale. So a larger voice on source water treatment concerns and other issues, certainly shared more resources and redundancies and emergencies, more input over costs than we currently have with our Des Moines Waterworks contract, and there certainly has been a history of successful regionalization efforts, WRA, as I mentioned earlier, DART, MPO, Westcom, and Metro Waste. The cons. Would a few cities control the direction and decisions, especially initially? And will that include West Des Moines Waterworks at 14%? We are the next largest customer that we have. Will there be possible peaking charges, rate structure changes that could have unforeseen financial impacts? Could there be equity issues among employees as far as even though AC Ward and Des Moines Waterworks are both selling their water to Central Iowa Waterworks, will they be paid differently? Will AC Ward get regional support for the necessary infrastructure upgrades? All right, on the West plant. The pros, we're in the driver's seat. I use the analogy in the West plant, we're in the driver's seat of the water needs for timing, or the timing of water needs for West Des Moines Waterworks. In regionalization, we're on the bus, so we gotta make sure the bus is going the right way, okay? We don't have to worry that West Des Moines Waterworks' needs will be secondary. A membrane plant has the capability to address source water quality concerns, nitrates, microcystins, and if you're hearing about the new forever chemical that we don't know too much about yet, the PFAS. It will be some improved taste and perception to some of our customers. It certainly means more control over costs, and we can grow the utility in a manner that's strategic and cooperates with other entities. But some of the cons. Will we have enough source water in times of drought, even extreme drought? Will we have any? Could we require West Des Moines Waterworks? It could require West Des Moines Waterworks to ask for more conservation. So calling for stage 2, stage 3, no outside irrigation, especially in the summer, especially in those extreme droughts. We could be seen as uncooperative in the metro. We most certainly cannot separate from purchasing water at Des Moines Waterworks at least through 2045. I showed you the map of the zones. How we use our distribution system is really important. We've invested $11 million over less than 10 years to buy water from Des Moines Waterworks to serve the South Zone. So we're not going to walk away from that investment anytime soon. And in order to reconfigure that could be costly to us. Okay, financial considerations, the money. So the board has engaged PFM to help an extensive financial analysis of the options. And I really appreciate Matt Stoffel at PFM. He's really done a great job in helping us walk through this. So these slides primarily focus on cost comparison on the option of the joint membrane plant with Van Meter and selling water wholesale to Waukee versus the regional option based on the assumption outlined in this outcomes document. It is a cost comparison. So you show rates, but it's really not inclusive of all the things that would be part of it. It's meant to be an apples to apples comparison of those two options. The regional cost comparison does include all the metro communities and rural water systems. So should a critical mass not participate, it may be worth a pause to relook at the financials and determine if this makes sense to pursue regional path in the future. So this one is a rate. This one is cost per 4,000 gallons. We generally say an average household uses 4,000 gallons. And so this is what the board saw. But they asked, what does this mean for customers, for our small commercial and large commercial customers? And so we took a look at that. And for the small commercial customers, you would note that in peak times, about $110 difference per month between the two options. For our large commercial, our larger user, we're looking at more like $20,000 per month in those peak times over the course of 40 years. So what we say, when you look at those two curves, the difference between those two curves is an opportunity to have 30% reduction in costs if we regionalize versus a West regional plant. Okay, summary of considerations. I put this together for our board. We're going to look at availability, quality, costs. It's just a nice quick summary to look. On availability for regionalization, We're a little uncertain right now on the timing of necessary improvements to provide water further west. There's certainly a long-range plan, but it's not currently in the 5-year CIP. If we don't get water when we need it, it could impact economic development, and that's true for either scenario. We know that with regionalization, long-term water availability is more certain. For a West Regional plant, it certainly puts us in the driver's seat of the timing, but our long-term needs for source water are going to have to be looked at a lot more closely further out. Our water use permit is definitely in place, and so we're ready to begin design if that's the path that we take. On quality. So Des Moines Waterworks is planning to expand the Des Moines River well field in the next few years. That should help with their microcystin and nitrate issues at Fleur Drive, but it won't address PFAS and PFOS. However, we don't really know the impact of that particular chemical at this time. There's no real current plans at McMullen, but nothing urgent from a water quality standpoint is happening there. On the West Regional plant, a new membrane treatment plant will obviously address source water quality concerns, and I say for 3/4 of our ratepayers. And I include AC Ward on that because we don't have source water quality issues at AC Ward. It would improve taste for those on the new plant, but that's only 1/4 of our customers. AC Ward, our customers that get Des Moines Waterworks water, their water quality and the taste would remain unchanged. So costs, I think I've already shown you the summary for costs. We expect with regionalization a 30% savings over going with a membrane plant. That's not to say that your rates right now are going to drop 30%. What I'm saying is if we built a West Regional plant, those costs would be 30% more over the next 40 years. So path forward. You can see from the financial consideration that I've presented, from the financial considerations presented, a compelling case for regionalization. However, there are some non-financial considerations that weigh heavy as well. So just recently, the West Des Moines Waterworks Board went back to the microgroup to shore up and insert some language that addresses some of our non-financial considerations. Those 4 items are that the assumptions and the basis for this financial model won't change for the next 10 years. Significant long-term decisions are being made. So the last thing West Des Moines Waterworks wants in a regional setting is for things to change in the first year with a weighted vote. That the new long-range plan will start in earnest so that we can make sure that we have a comprehensive plan that outlines what is needed and when it is needed for each community, including ours. Des Moines Waterworks will not be the first chair as a symbolic transition of Des Moines Waterworks now at the helm, but transitioning to this regional water utility. That the needs West Des Moines Waterworks has recently, the needs assessment that we've done at West Des Moines Waterworks recently will be supported and funded. I've heard this argument that Des Moines Waterworks assets need a lot of support, or that need a lot of work to get them up to the same playing field as AC Ward. The fact is that plants age and need continued reinvestment to ensure their reliability. AC Ward is no exception. We estimate that over the next 15 years, we're going to spend $10.5 million reinvesting in AC Ward. If West Des Moines Waterworks commits to regionalization, we want assurances that AC Ward will be maintained in the manner that it should. We also get water from Des Moines Waterworks plants. We should be as invested in their plants to make sure that reinvestment is continuing to happen, because if we don't support them and they fail, we fail too, because they're our customers. So the board really wants to hear from our constituents. So I have up here the times listed for public input. It should be noted that a vote to move forward with negotiating the 28EF does not mean that it's a done deal. Many steps still need to occur, and continued public outreach and input will be important and received by the board until that 2080 happens. But this is indeed the first step, and it's an important one. Okay, this is kind of a summary. We're here today, December 6th. Those times are listed on our website at 4 o'clock. The 14th, we'll be back in here to take a public information session. And on the 15th is when currently the board is scheduled to vote. So just in summary, we must begin planning for our future water supply needs. It takes time. It takes years to design, permit, and construct all of those puzzle pieces that are required: source, treatment, transmission, and pumping. Without each of one of those pieces, water cannot get where it needs to go. We have a responsibility to our ratepayers to stop kicking the can down the road and face the challenging decision of how we're going to provide water for our customers. We can't stay stuck in our corners. We must address the many challenges water utilities face and chart a path forward. Our customers and our future depends on it. And with that, the end of my presentation.
Thanks, Christina. I guess, Scott, from your board standpoint, any other information anybody wants to share before I open it up for questions from City Council? No? Okay, questions by the city? Okay, Gretchen.
Christina, thank you. Very thorough. And I just wanted to mention one more thing that kind of helped me get where I needed to go. You can probably tell the board had a lot of discussion over this control issue. You know, will we have control of our destiny for economic development? Because that's sort of, you know, number one. That we have to have, in addition, if we want to capture the 30% cost savings, we still have to be able to control our destiny. So we had a lot of discussion about that. And as Christina mentioned, part of the continued push with Des Moines Water Works, a couple of measures to really reinforce our ability to do that. But if Christina, if you could just really quick show that map again of the water zones.
Oh, sure. Stop sharing, but
That's, I don't want to get into the weeds here, but that was really fundamental for me to kind of get my arms around that we have these 5 zones. And if you look at that map, zone 5 is the one that's kind of southeast and then swings around to the south, and that is where we've seen a ton of, you know, high property tax paying growth. The red is zone 5 there. And so just think of what's there, and if you compare that to the comp plan and where we have, you know, industrial growth planned, that's it. So we're very concerned about that zone. That zone will continue to be served by Des Moines Water Works till at least 2045. So the fact that we would be a part of the regional governance and be able to have input and be in cooperative arrangements regarding decisions around providing capacity to that zone, that's big. You know, we're going to be better off from a control standpoint, I believe, as a part of a regional water entity, to be able to have input regarding serving our needs, capacity needs in that critical zone, which is where, again, if you put the comp plan map up there, it's pretty much, that's it. So even if we build West Regional, we would continue to be relying on Des Moines for zone 5. And we've had great cooperation up to this point on getting done what needs to be done. In fact, they've allowed us to do some things and meet timetables that we wouldn't have been able to meet on our own. So it kind of shows you when you combine resources and expertise, you really can get a lot done. So I just wanted to draw attention to that map because it was critical kind of how I got over that control issue. And it's important, I think, for everybody to take a look at and really understand.
Okay, appreciate that. maybe I'll kick off the questions. I know years ago when we were talking about other options, a big player in all this was going to be Xenia Water. What's the impact of Xenia in this whole situation? Is it important to consider them? I know they're providing a lot of water in growth areas into West Des Moines, but what's the impact of Xenia in all this?
Xenia is a purchase capacity customer of Des Moines Waterworks, and so they would have an opportunity to join the regional board if that moves forward. As far as the West Regional Plant, they are serving customers out there. We've been able, when we needed to work with them. I don't know if there'd be any interest in them pursuing water from a West Regional Plant.
Okay. All right. City council members? Questions?
Christina, you talked about if we go to, thank you, if we go to Central Iowa Waterworks, that Des Moines and West Des Moines would sell their water to them. And so if we are producing water at 1505 Railroad and selling it to Iowa Waterworks, Central Iowa Waterworks, and then we buy it back, how do we have a savings there? And I know for 30 years now, West Des Moines Waterworks has been doing major infrastructure improvements. Des Moines Waterworks is way behind on that. And how do we benefit from that? To me, it seems like Des Moines is the beneficiary of all of this, and we're not. So I just don't see how you're getting it. There's a 30% cost savings when we're going to sell it for one price and then buy it back at a higher rate, because I'm presuming that they're going to have their own office, their own staff, their own general manager, the whole bit. So if you got that other level of bureaucracy, where's the savings?
Yeah, good question, Kevin. And I had heard the same thing when I first came, that West Des Moines Water, AC Ward produces water cheaper than Des Moines Waterworks. Why would we do it? We actually went through line item by line item in detail how we put together that cost of treating water. And when we did that, we realized that we didn't include some overhead costs. And actually, the cost to treat water by Des Moines Waterworks and the cost to treat water by AC Ward were about the same. In fact, maybe Des Moines Waterworks was just a tiny bit cheaper. And so the water, we're right, we're going to sell it to Central, per se, all our water is going to go to Central Iowa Waterworks, and we're going to buy it back. And how does that make a difference? Well, if we were building a West Regional Plant, we're still buying water from Des Moines Waterworks. And so when we did that analysis, we looked at what the cost of that water to still buy Des Moines Waterworks water, plus our new regional plant water, and that's what the offset is. It's so much more likely in the future, if we don't participate in regionalization, for the water we still have to buy from Des Moines Waterworks, plus the expensive water out of the new plant. That's why regionalization makes more sense.
But what's the cost per 1,000 gallons that we're selling it to Central Iowa, and then what are we paying for it to buy it back?
So that's not mapped out there per se, and I don't have Matt is on the road tonight from TSM. There are going to be some overhead costs, I won't lie, because they're going to have an executive director. But in the end, the shared assets, the shared growth is what offsets some of those costs. Because otherwise, you build a plant, a West Regional plant, and more of it is not utilized most of the year. There's more efficiencies with regionalization.
So what is the cost for West Des Moines to produce it, and what's the cost for Des Moines to produce it? Because we don't, you already said we don't have contaminants that we're dealing with. Des Moines obviously does. So that's got to add increased cost to their production to take out the contaminants.
So right now, when I look at the costs, the overhead costs, our overhead costs, and Des Moines Waterworks overhead costs, our cost to treat is similar. I'm saying it's almost the same. Perhaps even Des Moines Waterworks is just a tiny bit less.
Okay, I would like to see those
Sure, we can provide
facts and
the
figures,
numbers
please.
too.
Councilman Trevilian, are you done, or are you?
Yeah, I'm done right now.
I've been trying to explain it in layman's terms and everything else. My background is in HR, so I'm going to ask a little bit about this executive director and this positions and whatnot. This executive director is going to be doing exactly what? And if you have an executive director that's over this regional water service, do we need all these other directors of all these other waterworks department? I mean, what is this person going to be doing exactly as an executive director that has the ability to hire other staff and whatnot? Where are they going to be housed? I know they report to this board. So I'm trying to understand if we have this regionalization board that has an executive director that eventually will hire another staff person here or there. There's got to be folks that do accounting and all the kind of backroom stuff that needs to be done. That infrastructure costs a certain amount, right? And is that what this $2 million that we would have to be, is that what's covering some of that? Costs creep up when you're talking about this and all of that. So I'm curious to see how we do some cost containment with building this extra layer. And you're saying nothing's going to happen with the staff at the current place for at least 20 years. It seems a little duplicative to me.
So, we are talking about hiring an executive director. That could be a person, or it could just be a contracted firm, right? And we already talked about having a third-party fiduciary, an accounting person that we would hire, third party. So I see that person, and those job duties haven't been defined,
Okay.
per se. But I see that person as someone that coordinates amongst all the producers and helps with the policy direction of the board. There are many still general managers of utilities that don't have treatment,
Okay.
that are still needed to handle distribution systems, pumping, all of those things that happen, all of our mains, hydrants, our billing. So I don't see that position going away. As far as executive director, I just think that they are gonna need to coordinate to get this thing off the ground.
Okay, and is this a flat cost that's, does it continue, is it annuity, this $2 million of this contribution
So the $2
that's
million
allocated? Is that annuity or a one-time payment?
Yeah, let me answer the 2 million, it's really total for all the communities. to
Okay.
kind of help get things started. I think if you go to the appendix of the outcomes document, it breaks down, and I don't remember how much West Des Moines Waterworks is, it's 14%, right?
Yeah, I see it here, yeah.
So that's our portion to help get things started, get legal hired, and get an executive director. As far as where an executive director will be housed,
Yeah.
those decisions will be handled and discussed,
Okay.
if we move forward.
Okay, and then you mentioned that the current board would still be in existence, right? And they will be providing governance to
So,
West Des Moines Waterworks, or
yeah,
still?
still
What
West
would
Des
they be
Moines
doing?
Waterworks, we're gonna be handling all of our distribution systems. We have 5 now, almost 6 towers, 8 booster stations, hundreds of miles of pipes and hydrants. So they're still gonna be providing policy and direction for everything but water production.
Okay, and our representative on this board is
We come
the
from
chair, it come from someone here that's,
Yeah,
oh.
we expect that, the appointee will come from the board of trustees.
Okay.
Or the board governed utilities. Now, other communities that don't have boards, that'll be up to them to decide how they want to
Okay.
appoint that person.
okay. And then the final thing, and I'll defer to the others, is that I do see that there's additional meetings for public input. And I just want to share, just my observation is I think for something this large and of this magnitude, I think having these meetings kind of in the month of December, they're kind of close together. I think it's kind of poor timing for the public to really be very engaged and come into these meetings and expressing. I'm not trying to change the meetings, I just want to offer an observation that, you know, within these 2 to 3 weeks during this holiday season, it really is kind of busy for families and busy for a lot of folks during this time. So I would have preferred to see maybe a more protracted process where there's a little bit more time when it's less busy for people to come out. That's just my personal opinion. Others might feel different, but I wanted to get that out there as a point of my thoughts. But I do want to thank you for this information. I don't take this information lightly. I know many people have put in lots of work to get us to this point, so I'm not trying to dismiss that at all. This is a meeting for us to express the good and the bad and the ugly, or whatever that might be, and to be transparent to what our thought process is. So I just want to be real careful of this creep-up factor for this board and what that might mean for us and whatnot. So you might have to address that a little bit more succinctly for the public moving forward. But I want to thank you for the information. I really do, and the board.
And this is some information that Christina would not even be aware of, but back in 2018 or 19, when FCS was doing their initial proposal, the same question was asked about cost of creep and what it was going to be, because there was a lot of angst about adding another layer of government to that, and FCS at that point in time said maybe 2 cents MGD. So from a magnitude level, it was a lot smaller than a lot of folks felt. Whether that's the right number now, I don't know. But that gives you some frame.
Thank you, Jay. I wanted to follow up, Renee. I appreciate your comments about public input, and I hope I conveyed this is like the first tiny, I mean, it's a step. There are many steps to occur. And then technically, the board, they're signing a resolution, choosing a path forward. But if they choose to move forward with regionalization, the full 2080 development has to occur and public hearings and approvals. So there's another 6 months of absolute certain ability to get public input before they would make any type of commitment. So you're right, it is tight on December, but there'll be more opportunities for public input in the coming months. And we definitely have a lot of public outreach to do.
Good evening, Christina. Matt McKinney. I appreciate the presentation, and I guess first I'll just say I'm glad to hear, Scott, your initial comments. It sounds like this is kind of first step in the process, and there's going to be a series of steps that go forward if it moves forward, and there'll be additional opportunities for input. I saw some of it here, and maybe hopefully more as we move forward. So a couple questions here. I received a copy of the document. I think this more detailed packet. And in looking at it, I see obviously West Des Moines, Des Moines, and Urbandale. Can you comment at this point what other communities have, if any, have made commitments, what the anticipation is about? I mean, you referenced this Western Regional one in terms of Van Meter and Waukee. How are they part of or not part of what you've presented here?
So, certainly there's been, this document was presented in its initial form in April. There were update presentations made to the surrounding communities that are all currently customers of Des Moines Waterworks. So there's been a lot of effort to kind of keep them in the loop. But I think they're all interested to know what's going to happen with regionalization. They're interested, they've gotten the framework, this most recent copy. They'll have to do their own financial analysis. And we would expect, a lot of outreach and conversations with them over the next several months as they make their decision on whether they want to move forward with the 2080 or not. As far as Waukee's currently a customer of Des Moines Waterworks, so they have been weighing the option as well if we pursued a West Regional plant or regionalized. So they've been part of that conversation all along. Certainly there's been a lot of conversations there. As far as with Van Meter, I certainly have updated them throughout the whole process. They were part of the whole studies with HDR that looked at the treatment technology and such. And so they're aware that the board is considering them and going to try and make a decision by the end of the year on the path forward. And we'll continue to work with them, and they'll have to look at what options they have moving forward.
Okay, but analysis and assumptions you've included within the charts and the expenses that we are seeing here contemplate those communities and others continuing to remain within the Des Moines Water Works system?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the regionalization framework definitely includes all the communities that I mentioned. If people don't, if a core constituents or a number of them don't choose to move forward, that will change the financial analysis and we'll have to take a look again.
Okay. So just to be clear here, we're talking about production. And in terms of local distribution, how will that be determined? Will we still have our own board making those decisions? Will it be a similar structure? Can you elaborate a little bit more on kind of the local aspect of when we need to get water to a certain area in our community for residential, commercial, or otherwise? How will those decisions change going forward, if at all?
They won't change, they'll be handled as they are currently. In the metro, Des Moines Water Works is a producer, West Des Moines is a producer, and Altoona is. Everybody else functions in that manner right now, where they just handle their own distribution systems and they don't have their own production. And so we will kind of evolve if they choose regionalization into that type of setting.
Okay. I think, Gretchen, you mentioned, I don't know if it's Zone 5, but the South Zone, and obviously we've had a tremendous amount of economic development in the city of West Des Moines. You guys have been a big part of that in terms of meeting needs. Zone 5, as I understand it from this presentation, is it 100% served currently by Des Moines Water Works production?
Yeah, as well as zones 3 and 4.
Was that 30% in Zone 3 and 4 and exclusively in Zone 5?
Yeah, total is 30%.
Okay. So, I think as we look at our building permits, we've had maybe close to a record year here. I don't know where we're at now, but over $1 billion in permits in this year. There's a lot of opportunity in the community. I guess my question relates to, have we had any issues, to your knowledge, in terms of economic development projects that have had a hurdle to clear or a problem to formalize because of a relationship with Des Moines Water Works or not a relationship?
I think all of our large economic projects, we've been able to work with Des Moines Water Works to make that happen. Whatever that may be, infrastructure-wise, whether it's additional pumping or in the most recent case, it's a throttling valve. We've been able to work through those on all the economic development projects.
So nothing that would be an impediment currently to our economic development activity?
Nothing currently, but I shared that we need to move forward. We need to start planning expansion and forming capacity and pumping capacity, especially at the rate that we're growing, so that we're ready for that and we're not behind schedule. It takes time.
Okay.
Maybe, Matt, to expand on that, I mean, if you look at Microsoft at Willow Creek Golf Course, that was a project that the city of West Des Moines, the West Des Moines Water Works, the city of Des Moines, and the city of Des Moines Water Works participated in to provide the CSR, the funding, the operation, all of that for that whole area. So it was actually 2 cities and 2 water. I mean, we paid, the city helped pay capital costs. It's on land owned by the city of Des Moines. It's water that's handled by Des Moines Water Works. I mean, so if you look at this, we've already, in order to manage these major opportunities, we've already partnered multiple times on facilities like that because of the magnitude of them and where they're located. So we've laid a lot of groundwork for this already for some of these major projects. And I forgot to mention that Ted Corrigan's here. Ted's the general manager of Des Moines Water Works, and he's available if we have questions for him or if he's got other input. We're here just to gather information. But to your point, Matt, some of these major things, and there's huge benefits because when Microsoft doesn't need it, it's water available to use for others. And so if you look at that, I can't remember the number, $15 million or something. I mean, it was a huge investment. But it was 2 cities and 2 waterworks utilities that I recall that participated in that.
But to Gretchen's point as well, I mean, right now, we haven't had any problems to this point with economic development. Des Moines Water Works has been very cooperative with us and helped us grow and expand like we need to. But regionalizing will actually have a seat on the board. So we don't anticipate a problem if we don't regionalize, because it's been fine to this point, but regionalizing, we actually get a seat on the board and can actually weigh in on these decisions and participate going forward.
No, I get it. I've got several more that I'll maybe connect. I don't want to dominate the conversation here. I also know that there's other people here. I don't know if there's opportunity for input, but I certainly want to
Yeah, I
hear
mean,
input
now's
too.
your- I think, Matt, now's your time to, and I think we'll all benefit from your questions, so don't be shy. I mean, that's why we're here. We want to get all the information, and again, I mean, there's additional public input meetings. There may be additional things that come out of this that people have questions about, or you guys need to provide information. So this is just the first meeting. We don't have to exhaust everything. This is getting people thinking about maybe issues they hadn't thought about before, or they gather information that they weren't aware of. So let's keep
Yeah.
plowing ahead if you don't mind.
And Matt,
Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
real quickly, and one thing we have done, I know we created a website with questions and, frequently asked questions and answers, essentially, so that people can sort of, have additional information. So I think like the issue that Kevin raised, when we put that information together, we can add that to the website. So we'll continue to have, that'll be a resource then for folks going forward, so that information will be there.
Okay.
I want to follow up with the question that you asked about conversations with the other communities. And over the past year or so, when the microgroup has been meeting, I've had conversations with nearly all the other communities, city managers, city administrators, in some cases city council members, asking questions, updating them on the progress we've been made. And then after we had a consensus on the last outcomes report, I talked to all but I think 3 of the communities and apprised them what was planned. They were all in sync with what was happening. They were all appreciative of the fact that the 3 utilities were going to take the lead, and there was, I think, general acceptance that they would follow up and make their decision as to whether or not they wanted to pursue the writing of the 2080-20F in the first quarter of 2022. So I can assure you, at least from my perspective, that many of the other communities are very supportive of the plan that's laid out and are supportive of taking the next step at least. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jody. So obviously, you've got a timeline here. I'm curious, obviously, and we have the council here. What is being asked of the council versus, what the, West Des Moines Water Works Board is going to be asked to do? Is this an informational piece? Is this something that we as a council are going to be asked to take a formal action, whether it's through resolution or something else?
It was my understanding that this is a workshop, this is merely for us to sort of lay out, sort of where we are at this point. And the only place we are at this point is that essentially the regionalization subcommittee has recommended that we go forward with signing a resolution that then moves toward negotiation, it has recommended going forward to that point. And so, at least as I understand the Iowa code, this is a decision that is left exclusively to the Waterworks Board of Trustees in this instance. So this is merely an informational session. Obviously, you all speak to your constituents. We want to make sure that this is part of that outreach is to get that in.
Okay, so I appreciate that. So when I look at December 15th, the timeline here on page 13 of the slide deck, it talks about December 15th being the approval of consideration of a resolution regarding path for future water needs. That's going to be something you all will be evaluating. It's not going to be something that we are going to be asked to evaluate?
That's correct.
Okay. And does anybody, and I don't know, Dick, if the city has looked at it from a legal perspective, but are we going to be asked to take a vote on anything relative to this?
No. And I think,
operates independently.
yeah, and I
Okay.
think that to Scott's point, what's helpful to us is we have constituents that don't understand the nuances of the authority, and it helps us respond to constituents to say, here's what the water utility is doing and why from a high level. If we get a complicated question or something we can't respond to, we can refer to them. But we need to understand the major structure of it. so that we can respond to constituents who ask us, because a lot of constituents thinks it ultimately rests here, but no, I mean, ultimately, that's the board that's gonna
Okay.
make all the decisions.
Okay. I guess, maybe one of my last comments for now would be, it's, I guess, not really too much of a question at this point, but, one of the pros I saw on here in one of the decks, I think it was on the western regional side, was water quality. And water quality is obviously a very important thing. And I don't, I'm not on the science side of things where I understand PFAS and the other components of it, but I've heard about them. And obviously, we've all heard about nitrates, the importance of that, and I understand Des Moines Water Works is doing things relative, the nitrate remover and those sorts of things. So for me, obviously, an important consideration, if I were in the shoes of making a decision, would be obviously the safety and the quality of the water as well. So that's something that stood out to me in your document.
And we're very mindful of that.
Is there money in the federal infrastructure bills and stuff that will be available to help this whole initiative? I mean, there's a lot of money that's gonna be floated out there for various projects. Do we know, is there money available to help with any of this?
So there's certainly money available if it's an SRF eligible project, and so expansion projects are SRF eligible.
Those are loans, right?
Yeah, those are loans.
Or the $65 million that just passed the bond referendum in Polk County, is there money available that you could apply for on a regional basis for this initiative?
So I think Ted probably speak more to it, but it's more on a source water quality initiative, and certainly that benefits us, anything that we can do to improve source water quality.
So just real quick, I'm here mainly to listen tonight. I understand that it's your decision as a waterworks board to make. I appreciate everything that's gone into this to this point. I do share the concern that, our constituents, we oftentimes get a lot of people contacting us about water issues and, notices of doing a backflow test that people might get testy about, and we always have to remind them that's not our jurisdiction. We don't have jurisdiction over that. There's a separate waterworks board. They make those determinations. We don't have any say over that. This is a little odd in that, my understanding is we've got a waterworks board. I think maybe Urbandale has one, and certainly Des Moines has one. So from our standpoint, we aren't really, a part of this necessarily. It's more informational for us, but some of the cities that don't have this waterworks board, they will have to act, right, to join or not join. A lot of those other cities, my understanding is that they are largely supplied by Des Moines Waterworks, so why they wouldn't want to join this is maybe beyond me, because they don't have a say right now at the table, and they get all their water from the city of Des Moines. My guess is that the others that you're talking to will probably join, but I'm here tonight. I'd like to hear, I know there are a lot, and we'll get to this, there are a lot of people around the outside of the room that have some questions, concerns that they want to bring up tonight, and I want to make sure that we have time for them to speak and to get their questions answered, and I want to hear, the debate back and forth and the question and answer that goes on there. Because I'm not an expert on water issues, and so I'd like, and I'm going to rely on you folks, and I want to hear this robust discussion and back and forth. I will say, one of the biggest things that I get from constituents is, please do something with my water quality, the drinking water. We've gone through water heaters every 5 years. Our water is a little bit hard. If there's something you can do with that while we're going through this process, and I brought this up before, man, that would be awesome. I think that's probably one thing that the citizens of West Des Moines would probably be willing to pay more for, is to have the water treated so it doesn't eat through their faucets and their water heaters, and then we can improve the quality. My God, if we can take care of that while we're addressing these other issues, you guys would be heroes. So, anyway, thank you for everything that's gone into this, and I look forward to hearing from people on the outside.
Yeah, let's, okay,
Before,
go ahead, Renee.
so I do want to ask a question. A lot of times when we're taking bold steps to really address a critical problem or need. Are there other municipalities outside of Iowa that we've looked at and studied that has done this and has been successful and it's worked out great? Sometimes that's a source of learning as we move along. And so do we have any good stories of other municipalities or other communities that have successfully engaged in this kind of collaborative effort, and it's been great? So sometimes best practices and what others have done has been a source of inspiration and learning.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of regional water utilities out there. Most of them have been regional for a really long time.
Okay, so they're,
Not as many that are happening to date. I certainly tried to analyze some of the more recent cases. There's really not a lot out there per se that are similar to our situation, but certainly lessons learned about education, public outreach, things like employee equity, things that we didn't think about with two different entities and employees and different benefits, things like that. But there are a lot of large water utilities that serve multiple metropolitan areas out there. And certainly, I know a lot of, I'm sure, I'm at a much smaller scale, but I'm sure Des Moines Waterworks networks with a lot of those types of utilities at times.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had one quick question, but before I did that, I wanted to thank you all because as a consumer of water, I really think the work that you do is heroic. I think it's one of those simple things. I'm a history teacher, and it's amazing that you turn on the water. Christina, when you say you turn on the water and it comes out, it is just phenomenal that can occur. So I do love that, and I'm very, very grateful for the hard work that you all do. So I'm very grateful for that. But regarding the regional plan, just one quick question. If you went the regional plan direction, would there ever be a need for that west regional plant near Van Meter in the future?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's something that I think should get further scrutiny. Where expansion, certainly McMullen and Saylorville are two plants that exist and have the capabilities for expansion, but where that additional treatment plant or new treatment plant should be located should get scrutinized a little further as we do this long-range plan and determining where we should build out in the future. So, good question.
Thank you. That's it. Appreciate it.
I got a couple more questions. If the other cities that are currently buying water from Des Moines don't join Central Iowa Water Works, how do they continue to buy their water from Des Moines? Because you said earlier that West Des Moines and Des Moines will sell their water to Central Iowa.
Yeah, so Des Moines Waterworks will have to continue to honor the purchase capacity agreement that they have with those customers, those wholesale agreements. They started in 2005, they end in 2045, so at least through 2045 that they would likely still honor those contracts.
Okay. And also, I mean, Renee talked about this timeline. I don't understand, and I'm gonna ask the question, why the December 15th date when you're just now starting to have these public meetings? And you've got one scheduled at 4 o'clock coming up, and most people work till 5. And, as Renee said, during the holidays. If this has been going on for, 5, 6, 7, 10 years, whatever it might be, why now the urgency? I realize that you gotta be looking to the future, but why the tight timeframe on this? Because I don't think that allows for the general public to get informed about it and attend these meetings.
Sure. And I think, I just trying to reiterate, this is a first step. It's a commitment that we're going to work to negotiate the 28E. The true commitment does not occur until the 28E is approved, and that's 6 months away. So there is plenty of time in the 6 months to do the public outreach and education and take more public input. The board is certainly making a decision on which path, but it's not set in stone until that 28E. And so that's the plan, is to continue to do public outreach and input during that time.
Okay, and Urbandale Waterworks was in planning process of building a treatment plant themselves, correct? And that stalled when the Maine Water Works started moving towards the regionalization and all that kind of regional. So if this is all about available water, wouldn't it make more sense to have more treatment plants, to have Urbandale out there having their treatment plant? Otherwise, you're still drawing from the same two plants, and you're obviously gonna have either a new plant out west or expanded plants in Des Moines. And I still don't see where the benefit is. You can say that there's a 30% reduction. I'm waiting for some information on that I don't know how that came about. But again, how does this address the availability of water when all we're doing is another level of bureaucracy, another building, another staff, all this other things just for a Central Iowa regional?
Well, I think, Kevin, I know you know a lot more about water. You gotta go where the source water is. The further away you put your treatment plant, the more challenging that can be. Urbandale has been considering their own water treatment plant, and they have to make their own decision, same thing that this board is deciding on. Could that plant be built? It could be. It'll be part of the conversation where we look at where we should expand future drinking water sources and treatment, just like the West Regional Plan. And we gotta look at economies of scale. There's certainly economies to scale to larger plants, but then we also wanna have that redundancy and reliability, so it will be a balance. And so I don't think that you should rule out that a plant using Urbandale's current source would not happen. But that's all part of the study and analysis that we need to start doing and making sure we're on the right path for. And I know there's been some study and analysis done, but we wanna make sure we take a look at that, and all agree, all these people that are thinking about regionalizing agree on the same page.
Christina, would it be safe to say that 30%, a large portion of that would be directly because of the $100 million plant over by Van Meter? Is that a huge part of that chunk?
Sure, it's part, there are gonna be costs obviously associated with regionalization, but membrane plants are expensive to run. They're high electricity, they require more source water. They're higher costs per 1,000 gallons to treat, they are. So that's part of it, and you are now operating and maintaining two plants. So you've got staff, the current plant, and make sure that we can address operation and maintenance at a second plant. So those are included in those costs.
Okay. Now's probably a good time to see if anyone here that's attending this has any questions or comments that they would like addressed to this whole initiative and where we are today. I guess if you do, I'd like you to come up to one of these two microphones and share your name and your address. And I guess my admonishment is this similar workshop in 2017 got way too unprofessional, in my opinion. So I want to make sure that we're happy to hear from people, but let's make sure that we do it in a respectful way. So happy to have anybody that wants to come up to one of these mics and share their thoughts, concerns, or questions.
And make sure you push the button to turn the mic on, because I don't think those are on.
Sorry. Thanks for the opportunity, Mayor. I have a couple of questions, and first of all, I'd like to comment. I believe regional water is absolutely the way to go. I think the WRA has proven that communities in the metropolitan area can work together for the benefit of all. We all know that water and sewer control development, so I understand the concerns that some are about who's going to control it and how they may control. If they control the water, they control development in those communities. We had some concern when we went with the WRA. WRA has been in existence for probably over 25 years, and it works out just fine. The only difference with that, we collect, convey, they treat. With water, it would be just the opposite. They treat, they convey, we distribute. And all the communities would keep their employees, their water system to maintain their infrastructure, which makes sense. One question I have on the map is the white area.
Yes.
Who takes care of that?
Well, some of that is land that may eventually be annexed. Currently, some of those areas are served by warm rural water, and some of those areas are served by Venia, or they have their own well.
Okay, but with the red is Des Moines serves?
So we purchase water from Des Moines, and it comes into our distribution system, so it's served by West Des Moines Water Works with water we purchase from Des Moines.
But it's not in West Des Moines?
Yes, it is.
It is in West Des Moines?
Yes.
There's an area, but the white part isn't in West Des Moines?
Currently. Well,
It's not in West Des Moines Water Works territory.
correct, currently.
Okay, and so my other question is, as we continue to expand west, who, as a community, okay, if we annex farther west, are we now, certain areas of West Des Moines are being served by other water providers? Is that correct, other than West Des Moines Water Works?
That's correct.
So all we're talking about is the area that we currently have in West Des Moines, and that's our district. So we're not gonna grow west or south or anything else.
We are gonna grow west, and we're gonna grow south, and we have agreements, or an agreement.
But you have to have an agreement with somebody else who's currently providing, do you not?
And we do have one with warm rural water, and
Okay.
we have certain territory bought out, an agreement with Venia. If we go beyond that, we'll have to negotiate with Venia for territory buyout.
Okay. And another question is on the infrastructure. For example, storage facilities or major conveyance issues. Will you be able to use the borrowing power of this new organization to build infrastructure and do capital projects? Or will those remain the responsibility of the local waterworks?
So large, not feeder mains, but large distribution mains, and elevated towers or storage will be still funded by West Des Moines Water Works, and we'll still be able to bond, as needed to, pay for them. Now,
So we wouldn't be able to use the new organization's bonding authority? Wouldn't it be cheaper, probably?
yeah, so the new organization's bonding power would be reserved for water production, source water development, core mains, and any shared pumping.
Well, don't we have an issue now, though, on as far as lack of storage based on our revenues? No? We don't.
We're
Right.
about to build a new tower.
Okay,
But no, we don't.
thank you.
Okay, we know you, Ted, but for the record, we need your address.
My name is Ted Omart. I live at 1026 31st Street in West Des Moines.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To expand on that, Ted, the Browns Woods area is served by Torco Water as well. It's not West Des Moines customers, so there is another private water utility in West Des Moines.
They have their own well, that's correct.
What's the name of that, Kevin?
Thor?
Or Browns Woods, yeah.
Yeah, they do some in Urbandale, too.
Hi, Julie Stout.
Julie Stouch, West Des Moines. I live at 4712 Westwood Drive, 3rd Ward. And so I am here. I first came to the city council because water things in 2017 that were going on, and had a number of concerns. I came with some comments, but there are some things that came up during this, so I'd like to both ask some questions and share my comments. One of my questions is about the timeline the cons, the pros and cons here under financial considerations. It's slide 17 from the presentation. The bullet point 3 under the cons, employee equity perception among different treatment plant employees. What does that mean?
So we have two different treatment plants that have two different union contracts that probably receive different pay and benefits.
And are those two in West Des Moines?
No, Des Moines Waterworks and currently West Des Moines Waterworks, and if Altoona joins, it's Altoona's contract.
Got it.
And so we all pay likely different wages, probably pretty similar, but we may have different benefit packages. So if we're now all under contract with Central Iowa Waterworks, will there be equity concerns with pay and benefits for those employees? That's what that alludes to.
Okay. And essentially, if I could rephrase that, then that would be those that are most likely, there would be an effort to equalize that across the board, or would it not change at all?
So I think we'd have to take a look at that. So different plants require different level of certification to operate. It's more complicated than just they're both treating plants.
Right.
So
Got it.
I'm just saying it's an item that probably will get brought up and probably will have to be taken a look at.
Okay. Also, I had a question about, let me find the page here.
Julie, another example is Des Moines Waterworks uses IFRS. Well, we use IFRS as well, so that would be similar kind of.
Right, right. Oh, I know the other question that came out of this. So you're looking at the Waterworks Board is going to make a decision to do a 28E agreement, which comes in the scope of your authority as the Board of Trustees, correct? I think that's what I heard. Okay. So, but assets are going to change. So when does the public get to vote? Because the Iowa Code says that when assets change, the public gets to vote on it.
We have an opinion from our legal counsel that we have the exclusive authority to transfer the assets.
Somebody actually sent me a copy of that code, and it's pretty straightforward, Scott.
I've read the code as well, and read the analysis from our legal counsel, and I also believe it is straightforward.
Okay. Then I think we're going to have some lovely meetings coming up in the next few months. Okay, so here are my comments. I'm a very proud resident of West Des Moines. I love living here. And two of the big reasons why I love living here is because our city does their infrastructure maintenance, and our waterworks does their infrastructure maintenance. And I'm not just talking about the plants themselves, I'm talking across the city, other kinds of maintenance that I know for sure, because of conversations I've had with people I know in Des Moines, have not been done. Now, they started being done under Bill Stowe, but for a long time they had not been done. So I appreciate that West Des Moines does that, and so it concerns me when we have talks about regionalization and letting go and doing this whole money game of back and forth. What's the cut that we're paying for that is actually going to go to maintain other areas when we've done a good job? You've done a good job of maintaining here in our community. I attended that workshop here in 2017 because I had concerns about the regionalization bill in the Senate. I am not opposed to regionalization, but I have a lot of concerns about it. And some of those go back to the very personal experience in 1993 with the floods. And I was working at the state capitol, in the Hoover building on the state capitol grounds. And we were required to go to work. And the Hoover building is one of those godforsaken buildings created at the time when they don't want you to open windows. It's July. It was 105 to 115 in the building every day, about 1,000 employees in the building, 6 porta potties outside. It was not a fun place to be. And it was a great joy to me to come home here in West Des Moines and have water. And we had that water because we were a separate utility. And floods are a reality of our life here on the plains. And they have been getting, you know, we had the one in '93 that there was like once in 150 years. You know, so I figure, you know, another 5 or 10 years and we got another one that's going to be worse coming at us, right? Because that's the way these timelines have been going on this. And so for me, for us to think about regionalization, I worry about that cross-functionality and how that could affect our ability to have water, because we did a great service to the community then. We were able to provide water. We went on some rationing here. I will say it wasn't arduous, but we did go on rationing, and we were specifically told we needed to do that in order to help the other communities. And I was glad to do that because I was just so grateful that we had water here. So there are a lot of new people here who weren't on the Waterworks Board 4 years ago, and even new on the City Council who weren't here 4 years ago. We have a disagreement on the code. It's always interesting how that happens with things, but the water the utilities, the public utilities in this state are owned by the people who get those services. That's who owns them. And that's what it specifically says in the code. And it also specifically says that decisions regarding assets and changing of the assets have to be voted on by the people. So as I look at the timeline in here, Christina, as the mouthpiece for the group today, has reiterated several times that by approximately 6 months, this 28E agreement can be finalized. Where's coming to these meetings and talking, listening for, an hour and a half, and then getting a chance to ask a question or whatever, that is not the same as getting a chance to vote on it. And that is very specifically outlined. And even if you have an attorney who tells you that other options are possible, I don't think the people are going to like that. And I think you need to think long and hard about that. I am very comfortable with the concept of doing a vote and not getting my way. That happens all the time. But I also get it some of the time. But I'm very comfortable with that if it's what the people want. But what bothers me about this, what bothers me about the timeline of rolling this out, that the notice came out at around noon on Wednesday before Thanksgiving when nobody's paying attention, and then the meeting is tonight, 2 days after the holiday weekend, it sets up a lot of questions about transparency, about concern for the people who are the customers, and about where things are going long-term on this. It starts to break down trust. And I'll tell you, I have a very high trust of the West Des Moines Waterworks. As was stated, you do an exceptional job with the work. I don't care about the people crying about the water. None of you folks lived in Medina, Ohio, where I lived, where the water comes out smelling like hell, and it's because it's so sulfurous. And that was not profanity. That was actually a description of the smell. And so, to me, I think you need to think long and hard about your responsibility to the people who you service. You have traditionally done a very good job at that. I would hate to see that change. And I think the need for the people to vote is pretty critical here on this. And it's not as clear as my esteemed friend Scott says it is. I guess the last thing I want to say, there's just a couple things. I think how the information is conveyed and how it is shared about all this is somewhat problematic. I've heard different bits of information from people inside different places, both Des Moines and West Des Moines, that have indicated that, you know, meetings were done in 2s and 3s so that they didn't have to do a public comment on this and conversation. And frankly, that is undemocratic. And I would hope that if those kinds of conversations have truly been going on, that they stop, because that's not how the system is supposed to work. And so pretty much that's it. You all know where to find me. And again, I appreciate the good work of the West Des Moines Water Works long-term, and, you know, have a great confidence in the ability to do well going forward. So, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, Water Board trustees, I'm Larry Anderson. I live at 3109 Meadow Lane in West Des Moines. I'm a graduate of Valley High School and of Iowa State University. Got a degree in civil engineering up there and was a registered professional engineer in Iowa through my working career. After college and Army active duty time, I returned to West Des Moines and took a job at Beanster & Kim. Was there for 12 years, and a good share of the time I was there, one of my clients was West Des Moines Water Works. And I think as a result of that, I was hired to be West Des Moines Water Works' first general manager. That was a real privilege for me. But I got to tell you, at the start of my comments here tonight, what I have to say here is not about that. It's not about the time I was there. Those days are over here someplace. Times change. Things happen, et cetera. So it's not about me and it's not about that time. But we saw a map up here on the screen of a road that went like this. Reminds me of Yogi Berra, right? If there's a fork in the road, pick it up. And I think we need to be careful about which path we take tonight. That's my message here to you. Back just a little bit about me. During the time I was general manager there, I served also on the Iowa section board of AWWA, American Water Works Association, and then also on the National Board of Directors as well. I want to quarrel just a little bit about when this regionalization idea started. My recollection on it is it's about 20 years ago, because it started before I retired in 2004, after having started at West Des Moines in 1977. Seems like that there was a request made by Des Moines Water Works to then the Central Iowa Regional Drinking Water Commission to talk about regionalization of water supply, treatment, distribution, the whole 9 yards, and everything. There were a lot of discussions that were done. None of them really went very far. Why? Because people were not really able to figure out what's in it for me. What can I gain if I do this? I being the entity. And so nothing happened. So I applaud those of you who have been working on this recently for getting it to a point where the thing's going to come out to have something happen, whatever that may be. But I'd like to talk with you just a bit about this business of the current proposal. It says really that one of the things, big things, is that Des Moines Water Works would remain as the 800-pound gorilla. That's not a really fair way to describe it, especially when Ted's sitting back there in the audience. But the point is of whether it's appropriate for any one of the entities that supplies water to be the big one, or should it be different than that? Okay? There are two proposals here, if I'm interpreting this right. One of them involves the West plant out by Waukee and Van Meter and so forth as an additional water treatment facility for the Des Moines metro area and bigger. So of course, if you compare that with a plan that doesn't have that construction in there, the one that has the construction is going to lose, hands down. No question about it. So my question on that is, why are we considering two plans like that? Why isn't it something a little more apples to apples, because to me, comparing those two is an apple on one side and orange on the other. They don't jive. The other thing, along with that, is are the existing water production facilities being used up to their capacities and to their water permitting authority from the state of Iowa? And one point to make here on this, and that is that water is not ours here around this table. It belongs to the state of Iowa. That's why we have water withdrawal permits. The state owns the water. They give permission to whomever to withdraw it. And so that has to happen. So of the three plants, the big ones in the Des Moines area anyway, I would say Fleur Drive and its water source are probably the closest of the three, being up to fairly close to the top as far as being utilized are concerned. So some additional work could be used there. In terms of the other three, the L.D. McMullen plant at Maffett Reservoir and the A.C. Ward plant in West Des Moines, we've got a ways to go. Add to that then the Saylorville plant, and there's still some room for growth in that one as well. Point is that raw water sources aren't going to change by virtue of whether regionalization happens or not. It doesn't matter who owns the water withdrawal permit, the water treatment facilities, or water mains. The water is the water. Its location, its quality, its quantity, et cetera, are going to be the same, and a governance change isn't going to affect that one bit. Now, ownership of water withdrawal permits could change, but still, that's not going to have any effect on that source water. Some think that various water production facilities compete with one another. I don't believe that. I don't support that idea, because they were built to serve the population that existed at the time they were built. The Des Moines plant on Fleur Drive was built there because of the Raccoon River. Water supply source was there then, still is. People were there in that general area in Des Moines at that particular point. Build a water plant there and serve the area around it. The McMullen facility at Maffett Reservoir was built to serve western suburbs and Norwalk. Makes sense for the same reasons I just offered. Saylorville, same thing. Built to serve northwest and north suburbs. You take water out of the Des Moines River with a guaranteed flow rate, guaranteed by the Corps of Engineers. Good deal, right? Our plant in West Des Moines was built where it was built because that's where West Des Moines was at that point. Some 5,000 people back in the early 50s, little bitty town, generally south and east of Grand Avenue, not quite, but it was kind of close. So why not build a plant there? We can put wells down and life's good. Third point I want to offer to you is that the current proposal for Central Iowa Waterworks is, as I'm sure you picked up from watching Christina's excellent presentation, the thing is very complex. And it'll require, I think, a very long, very thick 2080 agreement to make it work. And so there's a chance for the thing to get messed up, I guess is my point. And there's no guarantee that most governmental units in the Des Moines metro area will sign it. So what becomes of those who don't? Question I can't answer. It'll require exquisite computations of how costs are to be divided and rates computed. Requires transferring of existing facilities from one governmental unit to another. It adds, as we heard a little bit ago, an unintended bureaucracy layer with its associated costs, et cetera. And eventually, it'll put groups of employees together, like we had the question come up a bit ago. What do you do if one group of employees works for, say, West Des Moines Waterworks in water distribution, you've got another group of employees who work in that same general area on Railroad Avenue that work for Central Iowa Waterworks? You've got the probability there of some very interesting tensions between those two employee groups. We had that, folks, in West Des Moines, when there was a comparison made by people that worked with me versus those who work for city government in public works. Now, it didn't get to be terrible, but it was noted, and it's one of the reasons why AFSCME represents West Des Moines Waterworks employees today. It's been a good relationship, but that's why it's there. Fourth point. Some people have said that climate change will have less effect on a regionalized utility. Why? The water is still the water. It doesn't care who treats it, who transmits it, who supplies it, or whatever else. And then fifth, the comparison with what we're talking about here tonight with the WRA. And I'll grant it to you but there are some good comparisons there. But there are some differences. One of those is that, of course, the WRA was created because the federal government says you've got to do it in the Des Moines area, or else, right? Those of you that have served on that board know where that comes from. There's no choice. But federal government backed that up with saying, we'll pay you to build these things, whether they be sewer facilities or plants or whatever. The other thing is, as it stands right now, there's some fundamental differences between the two boards. With WRA, if I understand it correctly, each community, no matter how little or how big, gets representation on the board. And granted, no one of them has got the majority authority, but they get a representation. The proposal before this group tonight is 2 representatives from Des Moines Waterworks, and then 1 from Ankeny, another one from Des Moines, or West Des Moines Waterworks, and another one from Urbandale. Minimum of 5, maximum of 9. So there's going to be some cities in here that are not going to get represented. Those being Altoona, Clive, Johnston, Norwalk, Pleasant Hill, Waukee, and Windsor Heights. So what do? I don't know. So to begin to kind of close this up, because I know the hour is beginning to get a little late here, before any action is taken to plunge headlong into the current proposal, I strongly recommend an evaluation of other alternatives. You ready for this? First, Des Moines Waterworks sells the McMullen facility and its associated water supply sources to West Des Moines Waterworks. And, or maybe, Des Moines Waterworks sells the Saylorville facility and its associated water supply sources to Urbandale and or Johnston. Possibility, Urbandale builds the water treatment facility it's planned on for several years. Different ideas? You bet. The result, though, is developing areas needing more water get it without huge changes involved in any of those sorts of things. Des Moines Waterworks gets the desperately needed cash for replacement of aging facilities of all types, including water mains. But the bigger thing, at least in my mind, is Des Moines Waterworks is no longer sitting there as being the bad guy for whatever they do in the way of wholesale water rates. Somebody else gets to do that. Not necessarily Central Iowa Regional Water, but it's not Des Moines Waterworks anyway. The other thing, how about a simpler 2080 agreement that is produced or would be produced that requires an agreed upon industry standard method of determining the cost of any water that's sold wholesale to any other entity. The long-term agreement would supersede the current purchased capacity agreements, and with the result that all affected bodies get to weigh in on the method, thereby silencing the complaints that I'm sure Ted and his staff have heard many times over at Des Moines Waterworks. The requirement to approve would be stronger. If you buy water and you wholesale, then you have to sign it, but you get a chance for input along the way so that you can have an agreement that's at least reasonable to you. You may not get everything you want, but at least you can get reasonable there. There are several legal consequences associated with this current proposal for regionalization, but since I'm not a lawyer, I'll leave that to somebody else. And finally, we heard a bit ago about trust. I think that's huge. All of the drinking water suppliers in the greater Des Moines area enjoy a very high trust level among the people that we serve. Taking a step like the one that's proposed here, particularly if the timeline on getting the word out there to people so they know what's going on, with very little opportunity to become knowledgeable about it or input, I think will significantly destroy that trust. Don't do that. There's a better way of doing this. There's nothing that says you got to have it done by January 1st, but by the same token, there's nothing that says it has to drag on for another 10 years either, because I have a suspicion that a lot of you have been working on it for quite a while and are getting very tired of this. So, thanks for considering these remarks and for exploring other options before you proceed with the current flawed plan. Because when it fails, and it will, it'll be very difficult and costly to redo. Think about which fork you're going to pick up on that road. Thanks.
Anybody else want to go out? I'm still really excited.
Rickert, 4342 Oakwood Lane, West Des Moines. I've been dealing with regionalization at the West Des Moines Water Works longer than anybody in this room. Fact. I was appointed to the water board in 2009. Sorry, is that better? I was appointed in 2009. I am the former chair of the board. We have been dealing with this issue for a lot longer than the 4 years that were put up on the slide. We have been dealing with it the entire time I was on the board. That's a fact. Larry was dealing with it before that. This is not something that is new. It's something that's been around for a long time. Karen Novak, who was the chair of the board before I was, dealt with it. I've dealt with it. Scott's the chair, he's dealing with it. I want to say to start off that I'm friends with everybody on this side of the table. Aaron, I don't know you very well, but Aaron took over my seat when my turn was up. But I'm friends with all these people. They're all good people. I want to start with that, okay? We can have differences of opinion, and we can talk through it. Scott and I are different ends of the political spectrum, but we talk about politics and joke about it, and he's one of my better friends in this world. But you're going to see some very different opinions on this topic depending on who you talk to. And you've heard a lot of things from different people on how we got to where we are today, but there's a lot more to that history than just a start of this a couple years ago. I don't think you guys want to get into it. I'm happy to tell you everything that's ever happened on this topic because I know it, at least from as far back as 2009 when I went on the board. I don't think it's accurate to say that you guys, as the city, have no say. You do. These are 5 unelected people. They are appointed members. What the proposal is, as I understand it, is these 5 unelected people are going to take the assets of the water work and transfer them to someone else. There's no accountability for these 5. The reason Chapter 388 of the code requires a public vote, and it does, and I know we can have a difference of opinion on that, Scott, is because the assets are owned by the city. They're not owned by the waterworks, they're owned by the city. The ability to manage those assets has been transferred to the board. That's the distinction. You own them. You are the elected folks. You are the ones who will be answering to folks as to what happens with this. Not 5 unelected people over here. You will be. And for these 5, my last meeting, I encouraged you, if everybody remembers, to have as much public discussion on this as possible. It's been going on for 10 years, and here we sit today, and today is the very first meeting to discuss this that has ever occurred. Scott and I joked earlier, Scott said nobody's even called him about this. Well, it's because nothing's been conveyed to the public, that this is even being considered. If you look at the agendas that were put out for today's meeting by both the city and West Des Moines Waterworks, all that both of them say, the cities, discussion on future water supply needs for West Des Moines. One sentence. No attachments. Apparently, there's a micro group, what's that, 1/2 inch thick? Here's a presentation from Christina that she put on very well. 1/4 inch thick. All of this stuff exists. There's more paperwork that exists. None of it has been given to the public to provide any input. And what I would tell you, if you look at the West Des Moines Waterworks agenda, which I think showed up today, because when I met with Gretchen last Friday to talk about this, I said, you guys haven't even put out an agenda for the joint workshop. So it wouldn't surprise me that this agenda came out in response, and all it says is, workshop, future water supply needs for West Des Moines. Again, no notice whatsoever to the public about what's being discussed here today. No attachments, nothing. Absolutely nothing. So if you're John Q. Public, sitting out there, you don't even know to show up for this meeting. Some of us have caught wind of it, and that's why we're here. So what we see when we look at this, though, I mean, we look at things and it says, on the 15th, we're voting, or we're going to sign the resolution and we're going to move forward. To me, you've done it backwards. You're telling the public what you're doing it, and then you're asking for input. Ask for input, then decide what you're going to do. Everybody here knows this is a hot button political issue. The minute you sign that resolution, it is down that path we're going, this is going to happen. Why? Because all these things have been tweaked to get to this point. This micro group that's been meeting, it's been meeting long before COVID. COVID didn't shut that down or prevent public meetings. Those could all have happened. You guys have been having meetings the whole time. You can have whatever meetings you want to have. They were kept small for a reason, to try to see if a deal could get cut. You all know you have those similar meetings with other folks in town, because if you get past whatever the certain number is, you trigger a public meeting requirement, and sometimes you don't want to have a public meeting to talk about certain issues. It's not nefarious, it's not a problem, but to say that this has been done in the public and then COVID prevented it is not true. It has been worked to see if a deal could get reached. Right now, the deal is what they've said. They want to sign a resolution. Well, once you go down that path, as Larry said, it's hard to reverse this. And again, I think you've got it backwards. You should have asked for input, informed people what you're doing, and then done it. The good thing is you still can. You don't need to sign a resolution on the 15th. We've been making budgets at the West Des Moines Waterworks for years, not knowing what's going to happen. For the last 5 years, it's always been, well, are we going to regionalize or not? Well, I don't know, we got to make a budget anyway, so let's make it. And you've made one, and it will be voted on at your meeting on December 6th. That was the purpose for that special meeting, not a special meeting to talk about this. That meeting's been on the agenda since last year. It'll be the same meeting next year. We get together for 10 minutes and we approve the budget that we've talked about for 3 or 4 meetings prior to that. Now you're trying to slip in some more discussion about this because I think you feel bad that you haven't had any public discussion on this. And there's a workshop on the 14th, but if you look at what this says, it says it doesn't really matter. On the 15th, we're signing the resolution. You got it backwards. Can you even do what you're doing? There's a legal question on that, and I'm sure it will be litigated. But to me, the greatest trump card you can play is put it to the vote of the people and let them decide. Because they're the ones who should decide. And I don't know why you would be scared to put it to a public vote, but it sounds like you are. And again, it's 5 unelected, unaccountable people trying to do the biggest change to the West Des Moines Waterworks in its history, other than maybe the day it was formed. I don't know why you wouldn't put it to a vote, and I would encourage you to do that. There is a lot more on how we got here, the politics behind it, whether Des Moines is broke or not. As Bill Stowe said it to us in one of our meetings in 2012 or 2013, he says we have to do things different because we're broke. And if you look at every step that Des Moines Waterworks has taken since that meeting, it all makes sense. If you actually listen to what they said, he looked around the room, he said, there's no press here, I can say this. Des Moines Waterworks is broke and we've got trouble. That is not a reason to regionalize. That's a reason to get better management. They have better management, right? They've tried to change some of their ways. They know they have crumbling infrastructure they have to fix. We have a couple of excuse me, comments that a few of our board members made when I was on the board that I think are very instructive. And I don't think it's ever changed. Maybe it has, but I don't think it's changed. One of the comments that kept coming up at our meetings was, why are we trying to get married to someone that we don't even want to date? That still rings true today. Larry talked about trust. We've had other members say, flat out, I don't trust anything that Des Moines Waterworks does. And yet, we want to jump into bed with them. Where we go from a situation where we control 100% of our destiny, there are assets You want to pipe someplace for one of your projects? We'll work with you to get there. We've never not worked with you. We might have gotten creative and gotten some other people involved, but there's not, to my knowledge, not been a single project of economic development in West Des Moines that the water didn't go where with you when you needed it, exactly when you needed it. Hasn't been. If I'm mistaken, somebody tell me. And you want to give that up to somebody you don't trust, where the best you're going to have is 14% say in how your assets are used. Des Moines has 39% based on these numbers. Ankeny has 11. That's 50%. You don't have any control over where economic development's going to happen in West Des Moines. You have to rely on them, and you have to trust them to do what's right. And I think everybody in this room knows we haven't been able to trust them yet, so why would we trust them in the future? It's a big deal. This is not something that should be done on a whim and without any public input, and yet that's where we are. I'm happy to go through this whole proposal and point out some issues, but bigger level, you just heard some from Larry. Here's some options. Those haven't even been considered, right? Buying the plant, Urbandale doing its own thing. There's only two options that's been considered. One is regionalizing as a whole. The second is doing something smaller out west. And even the smaller out west, they didn't even analyze one of the options, which would have been a larger group of Urbandale, Waukee, West Des Moines, Van Meter, Clive, Windsor, whoever the heck wanted to join that. Even their own stuff said they didn't analyze that. So they really put two things on the table and said, well, I guess we have to go with this. You don't have to do anything. We have agreements in place to have water until 2045. That guarantees us till then. We have 25 years to find some other source or do something different if we don't think we have enough. We do, we will, and we can get there. If anything's needed, we've got 25 years to get there. But those aren't being considered. You haven't even put those on the table. It's either regionalized with everybody, or else it's regionalized just out west. None of these other options have even been considered. There's a lot left to this. I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was you, Larry, people getting tired of still talking about this. Well, that's right. But you got to find some more energy to deal with this conversation, because it's too big to give up without having explored everything. It just is. And those options haven't been explored. And it sounds like they won't be, because this is going to be signed on the 15th. I think that's a big mistake. I think you should hit the brakes. I think you should get input from the people. I think you should put it to a public vote no matter what you decide. Whether you like it, right? If you want to do it, fine. Where's the harm in putting it up for a public vote? That's the ultimate trump card. That is, the people wanted it. That is the democratic way. Put it to a vote, let them decide what they want to do. They want it, great, do it. They don't. Cost savings of 30%. I know we like to have a little graph that shows the millions of dollars going up, but if you break that down and actually did a rate study, it's not really that much. $10 million divided by 50,000 people, I'm rounding for West Des Moines, I'm rounding on the low side, it's $200, right? This isn't something that can't be managed properly like we've been managing it properly. Scott's managing it, this group is managing it. I did when I was chair, Karen did before me, the people before them did it too. If you manage it right, you can handle whatever these issues are. You don't need to go run off and jump into bed with somebody that you don't even want to date. I think there are legal issues with this. I think you will be sued. I don't think it's a question of are we? It is definite you will be sued by some folks. I think you need to prepare for that. I don't think you have. I know I had asked Christina, and I appreciate you reaching out to me. 2 weeks ago before Thanksgiving to let me know that this was even happening. That's how I got notice. I then had a couple conversations with folks, and I've been asked by a couple of these folks and a couple of you to come tonight, and that's why I'm here. I'm happy to provide any input after this meeting that people need or want, or answer any questions that I can. I think this should be the first day of many, not the first day of a couple. And I think that's been conveyed pretty well. But I appreciate the notice that you gave me. I appreciate the comments. I think that there's a lot left to be decided here, and the energy needs to be put into it. There's no reason why we can't keep moving on. We made decisions before. We have to move forward with something on the west side. But there's no guarantee that that will get built. I can't remember who asked the question about what happens with the west side plant. If you go to a regional entity, there's no guarantee that plant gets built. There's no guarantee that any upgrades are made to AC Ward. They may decide to build a plant someplace else in town that they think would better serve everybody's needs, and they could shut AC Ward down. And you have a 14% say in whether that works or not. That's a fact. If I'm in your shoes, and I'm not, if I'm in your shoes, I want to control my own destiny. And if I'm in your shoes, I want to make sure the people have a say in this. And I want to make sure that everybody keeps that clear in their heads as we go forward with this. Because this is not something you can do and then undo once it's done. Once it's happened, it's over. You can't go back. So we have to get it right. So I would encourage you to do that and to do it out in the open. Because I don't think it's been done very well out in the open so far. But the good thing is we have time and we can fix it. So that's what I have to say. Okay.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Sure. Yeah, no, if anybody else wants to, let's finish up here, but we've been here, we spent a lot of time, and if someone's got something to say, we want to hear it.
I promise to be very brief. Jay Byers, President and CEO of the Greater Des Moines Partnership. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Personal address, 5150 Grand Avenue, 12 blocks from West Des Moines. But anyway, I just would like to compliment the West Des Moines Waterworks staff, board and the Des Moines Waterworks staff and board and everybody else who's been working on this. I know regionalism is hard, but these are important discussions to have. And again, anything that we can do in terms of providing opportunities to share this information, moving forward with the business community across the entire region, with all the other partners, we want to play that role. And again, I know there's still a lot of discussions to be had, but just want to compliment everybody for tackling a very, very difficult issue. And I think that there are lots of common ground solutions, and anything we can do to help get to the finish line on these discussions, we want to be part of that. Thank you very much.
I'm the general counsel for the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities. We have 541 city-owned water utilities as members, including the 3 board-run utilities that are talking about this joint venture. I know some of you pretty well. And I'm not here today to advocate one way or the other on the specifics of the proposal. But I do want to provide the perspective of what it's like to try to manage major infrastructure investments when you are a municipal entity. And for the most part, your authority ends, at the limits of the city, right? I appreciate that perspective a lot, but I think maybe some of you aren't aware that we have dozens of communities in the state of Iowa that do exactly these types of joint projects all the time and have since the 60s. We call them joint action agencies on the electric side. And they make major investments in generation and transmission together because they have to. Communities are too small to make a major investment in a coal plant in Iowa when you're a municipal-owned electric utility. And they don't put those investments up for a vote when they're a board-run utility. They go ahead and manage those assets. But they also, when they create joint action agencies and move forward with joint entities, don't give up the ownership of their retail electric utility in town. We have examples of this in Northwest Iowa on the water side as well. The Lewis and Clark Regional Water System has a number of Iowa communities that are members, and they actually coordinate across state boundaries in South Dakota and Minnesota. Our joint electric entities also collaborate across state lines to do these things. They have joint revenue bonding capabilities, and they do a good job of it. And they make expensive, complicated financial decisions. They get into business with some of the biggest utilities in the country, and they're able to do it through these joint entities. And so the perspective I want to offer is don't be afraid of these entities. The entity itself, the concept of regionalization, the joint board, isn't necessarily the reason any of these projects succeed or fail. A lot depends on the hard work that they're doing on the analysis. You know, are the plans for the plants right? Are they accurate? Are the estimates right on growth? What will happen with rates and the assumptions that they're making and trying to do that work? And that's where this will succeed or fail. Don't be afraid of joint action with other communities because we have examples where that really does succeed when the public tries to move forward together with other communities. It can work, it really can, and that's the perspective I want to offer. But you have to trust them and the numbers that they're running and the projections that they're making, the consultants that they've hired. And to a certain extent, I think you do need to trust the goodwill of the other communities that are involved and the perspective that others have about should we move forward as a region and what would that mean for economic development. It's clear to me that on the electric side, it makes sense to do these joint projects because it's clear that it saves money and it keeps rates lower. It really is clear to me. And I think the same can be said for water. It's not a brand new concept. We have an entire chapter of the Iowa Code, 389, no one's used it, called joint water utilities. I mean, it's for a long time people have thought about how to make this work, whether the numbers do, whether individual communities want to share control. With shared ownership goes shared control. And these are good mechanisms for doing that. It can work if you make the right deal. All right.
Okay. Anyone else for tonight? All right. We'll adjourn the work. Jody?
I'd just say one thing again to piggyback on what you said, Mayor, earlier on when you said that you had Ted Corrigan and also Amy Keeler from One Waterworks during the audience. And I want to commend them for coming and being at the bargaining table for all of this time. Some of the issues have been very, very complex and in all honesty very contentious. But I appreciate the fact that they've been there through it, and that's how we got to the proposal tonight.
Okay.
Just one more question.
Sure.
I mean, the board has had a lot of discussion about, Brian referenced the, gosh, you don't trust them. I want to reinforce that we would not have been able to do some of the things we've done for economic development projects if Des Moines Water Works hadn't really gone above and beyond, frankly. So we've had a good working relationship. But there's still this idea that we're going to marry Des Moines. We're not going to marry Des Moines. We're going to become a member of a regional entity. With all the suburbs and Des Moines with shared governance. And that's a very different concept than, well, we're just hitching up with Des Moines and hoping for the best. So I just want to make that clarification. It took us a while to kind of get over that mindset of, well, it's not just, we're not just doing that, we're becoming a regional entity with many members and many voices. Urbandale and West Des Moines would, in all likelihood, because we have boards and have expertise, have a great deal of influence within that regional entity. and we've seen good cooperation up to this point. Going forward, we'd be part of the governance, complete transparency. It's very different from just, gosh, we're turning everything over to the mayor.
Gretchen, I just have one more, I know we're closing these out. There are people that might call me and ask me about the other public meetings, and if the decision is that there is going to be a signature and an approval of this process, they're wanting to know what is the purpose of the input meetings and what is the purpose of them coming if the decision's made. And I do want to tell them, and I want to be honest, because those are some of the questions I'm getting. What is the purpose of that input if December 15th is an approval of it? So I'm just saying,
Let me address that. Sorry.
Important to clarify.
Okay, again, I'm not unopposed to what you guys are saying, I'm just saying, everybody wants to just understand their role and their purpose. And if it is public input, what is it for? If it is a decision that is already made by December 15th.
And if I might address it, I think.
Is that a fair question?
It is a very fair question. I think it's a misunderstanding of where
Okay.
we are in the process.
Okay.
So at this point, all we have is a recommendation from two people on this board who believe that based upon the work that's been put in, that they would recommend joining, taking the step forward to approving a resolution to then attempt to negotiate a 28. On the 15th, then that is the entire board to consider whether or not to agree to that resolution. So at this point, we only have a recommendation from 2 of 5 members. And so the input is to help all of us make a decision so that on the 15th, then we have a vote on whether we go forward with that or whether we do not. So the input is important, and it's a very fair question. I just think it's gotten lost in some of the discussions tonight.
Okay, well, that's important, Scott. What you just said is important. And thank you for that, because I do think it's getting kind of lost in how it already is written. It says on 15th, approval of. And again, I'm not saying I'm against everything. I'm all about transparency and having the people that call me, I'd be able to tell them that they do have a right to have input. So what you're saying is that these couple of meetings that are coming forth is for true input in order for the whole board to make their decision on the 15th. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And I would just
Well, I
say,
appreciate the clarity.
Appreciate the question.
Mike, I've spoken up. Russ said he wanted to hear robust discussion with people posing questions and
We all do,
concerns. Wanting to kind of get that back and forth about what are the different perspectives. So that's been the spirit of my comments, just wanting to respond to some of those and get some points across that
Well,
been discussed.
and I appreciate that. I just think words matter and how we communicate it and how the public perceives it are two different things. That is it a done deal already, or is there time and input because everybody's busy and everybody wants their voices heard and everybody wants to trust the process?
Well, and
I
to that,
that it is not a done deal.
Okay, all right, and I'm good, I'm
It's
good,
not a done
I'm
deal.
good.
well, to that point, Gretchen, I mean, I kind of hoped for a little bit more back and forth tonight than there was, but it just, it was people presented, everybody listened, somebody else presented, and there really wasn't a lot of back and forth that I kind of hoped for tonight. I appreciate some of the back and forth that we had, and hopefully at the other meetings there'll be more back and forth. I mean, I've talked, Brian, I talked to you, I told you, there is no political dog that any of us have in this fight. We want what's best for the city of West Des Moines, for the Waterworks Board, for our ratepayers, for our citizens, for the region, and, whatever that is, and we've got a Waterworks Board that, has studied this. We've got an executive director, general manager who's got expertise in this, who's gone to school for this. We're relying on the expertise of this Waterworks Board that we have here, and the others around with the, city or Des Moines Waterworks and others. And we really want to hear this robust discussion back and forth and have the citizen input and hear what people have to say. And I hope there's wish there was more of that tonight than just people presenting and people listening, but I hope there's more of that in the future. And, you know, whatever the best thing is, I trust that we're going to do, and that we're going to have a great future in this city going forward and in the region. You know, we've got a lot of regional entities out there, and they've been very successful to this point, and they've helped keep down costs and helped create efficiencies that otherwise we couldn't have gained alone. And so I look forward to more discussion on this. And I really do want to say, too, I agree with the mayor. You know, the meeting that we had on this in 2017 or whatever, that wasn't pretty. It wasn't a very respectful meeting. And I really appreciate everybody here tonight being respectful of others' opinions and comments, and just really keeping it above board. So thank you to everybody.
I guess finally, Urbandale Water Utility is going to have a workshop, right, with the mayor and city council in Urbandale in December?
They already had their workshop.
Have they?
Their board will be doing the same thing that this board is thinking about doing, and considering a resolution of which path they're going to take, whether to build their own plant or commit to negotiating and working in the next steps towards a regionalization.
And Ted, how about the timing for Des Moines? Because again, I mean, if one of the three entities says, no, we're not moving forward, that probably, yeah, so from your guys' standpoint, what's the process and timing for Des Moines Water Works?
Mayor, we're actually looking to West Des Moines and Urbandale to make the decision.
Okay.
After going to follow.
Okay.
And then once that's decided, our board intends to pass a similar resolution and then begin the process.
Okay. Okay.
As I said many times, this is a first step.
Okay.
So to that point, the resolution can be passed on December 15th, then you engage in more discussion. You could go down that path and get a certain way down and decide, you know what, this isn't working. I'm not sure that we can agree. I'm not sure this can go forward. There's been other information that we've looked at and received, and, well, I don't know if this is going to continue to go forward, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the other comment, kind of to Tim's point is, you know, we've changed the governance of the WRA, we changed the governance of DART, we changed the governance of the MPO, all of this within the last 15 years to avoid any issue of one city is going to come in and control everything that we're doing jointly. So I have no issues that the governance structure isn't going to work, because we've just stress tested every single major metropolitan cooperative effort that we've had, and it's all come out where people feel a whole lot better about it, and it's moving forward in a better direction. So I don't have any concerns about the governance piece of it. Getting back to Gretchen's point, I mean, that's been the concern on a lot of these is, would the city of Des Moines control all this? I think we figured it out on all those others. So there's a governance structure here that I think people will support. I've heard from other cities who don't have a water source, they want a solution because they're going to have to join it. They can't go produce their own water. They don't have an alternative. They want an alternative that's going to be the most cost-effective for them as well. And so they're watching it intently, but the idea that somebody like Ankeny's not going to sign on, they can't produce their own water. So, and I know Jody's had those comments, but I've heard from a few mayors of, we want a solution that's cost-effective because we have to do this. We have to be part of it.
Yeah, I know Larry, and that was, the governance that Larry spoke to was a proposal early on by Des Moines, but the most recent proposal is that everyone that joins will vote at the table unless you're a total service customer. So if Des Moines Water Works not only sells you water, but takes care of your entire distribution system, then you're underneath the Des Moines umbrella. But everybody else that joins will have a vote.
Can I say one more thing about the vote? So we're talking about 14%, we're talking about 39%. That's for the weighted vote, if a weighted vote is called for, right? But all of us serve on regional boards and commissions, and there are weighted votes on those. In my 12 years, I haven't seen a weighted vote called for.
In my 22 years, one time at Metro Waste Authority, after we stole Tom,
So,
They had a weighted vote on who they were gonna, they had a weighted vote on who they were gonna hire to replace Tom,
Okay.
but that's the only time.
So one time
And
in
I've been
22.
actively involved in the governance piece. What people have come to, something like this, the WRA, the MPO, DART, what they've all said is this is either good for all of us or none of us. So once you do this, one city can't say, well, this is good for me and it's bad for everybody else. I mean, once you're there, everyone says, look, we're all in this together, and we can't pick and choose of who wins and who loses once we're together. And so that's why I think one of the reasons you don't see weighted voting. So even the one time it was called, it had more to do with who they were gonna hire to run it than whether or not the organization was functioning appropriately. There's a big difference of opinion on who Tom's new replacement should be.
May I?
Sure.
All right. Certainly good discussion. Appreciate the information from both sides. I guess what stood out to me that I wanted to at least raise here, I don't know that we'll have an answer here, but one of the first questions I asked is whether we, on this side of the table, relative to the city council, have any legal action we need to take. And what I hear tonight is that we don't or we do, right? And I think, Brian, you specifically mentioned that the assets are titled or owned by the city. I actually think that is true, that the assets are owned by the city through some other work that I've done in the past. So personally, I'd like to really understand whether or not the assets of the West Des Moines Water Works are owned by the city. And when I say owned, I mean titled in the name of, the city. And if that is in fact the case, I'd like to better understand how, if those assets are titled in the name of the city, how those assets, if they are being transferred. I don't know if this is a lease. I don't know if this is some other unique structure I'm not familiar with. But if the assets are actually being transferred legally to another entity, how that can occur without the city taking a formal action to, say, transfer the property unencumbered or whatever it may be. So again, I don't know that there's an answer here tonight, but it's something that through this conversation struck me, and it's something that I'd like to better understand.
And I know it's been looked at before, and Dick, I think the challenge is that we have creative lawyers who can all read the same thing and say it means different things. So, we're happy to share the information with you, Matt, even though, Dick and our people may say one thing, somebody else may say another, but we've got to follow the advice that we've been given. And I know you all have sought your own legal advice, so I don't want to get bogged down in that. What we're trying to figure out tonight is factually what's the alternatives and what makes sense to pursue to provide all the water that we're going to need at the very best price we can get it. I mean, that's the goal here. I think the plan that started this years ago was in 50 years we're going to be 50 million, or whatever it is, 50 million gallons of water short. So everyone's saying, okay, how are we going to provide this 50 million gallons of water at the most cost effective? That's all what we're trying to figure out. And that's the goal of all these conversations, was how best can we provide the amount of water that our community needs at the very best price, and any more with some redundancy. I mean, if you're all on it on your own and you run into a problem and somebody poisons your water, you're done. Some of the regional stuff is, okay, we got a problem, but we're big enough that we can be supported by other people until we can fix what the issue is. So there is redundancy in this whole thing too, but again, I mean, that's, you guys are working through all that, but we appreciate the update, we appreciate the information, and would like to continue to understand as you move forward so that we can respond to the best we can to our residents on what's happening and why.
Okay, you certainly can go to the Waterworks website, it's up as of yesterday. It's got information on it, we're continuing to add it, we're gonna add the slide deck from tonight. The outcomes document that we've talked about, that's on the website.
Yeah. And the 18 months that I chaired that group, every single meeting was publicly noticed. Every single meeting was recorded. The recordings were put on websites. I don't know, Ted, if that stuff's still available.
Yeah.
So if someone wants to go back and listen to 18 months of meetings when it was a much bigger group, you can go listen to every single meeting, the entire meeting.
And I attended a bunch of those. I was at the one where the guy said this won't be cost effective. Some of the consultants it doesn't save money to do this. So, anyway, I also want to just add one more thing. Comparing water to waste to transportation, I mean, those other things are important in our larger community, but they are not life survival things. Water is a life survival thing, and it has a different feel to people because it's literally something fundamental to life. And so I think that we have to have some really strong conversations with a lot more clarity. I appreciate the quality of what was shared tonight, but there's a lot of language in there that is not clear. And it's not clear because I'm not a water expert. It's not clear because this language was chosen to not be clear. So just, this whole trust thing is gonna make or break this thing. I'd be happy to show you later, Scott. So anyway, I just think it's water, and it's a whole different kind of thing than cars and buses, and it's a whole different kind of thing than waste management. You know, it's just different, and you have to recognize that difference. So, anyway.
One thing I want to add to Matt's question about ownership. If you go to the Polk County Assessor's website, it says 1505 Railroad is owned by the city of West Des Moines.
Well, but if you go further,
We're not
But-
going to solve the legal issue tonight.
Yeah, so the land will always, and the land will always be West Point, and that will be the setting. The assets themselves, we
Okay.
believe, are owned by the West Point Waterworks.
We've heard so much about the timetable question. I feel like, could that just be addressed, you know, why the board set itself, you know, a goal of trying to come up with a direction by the end of the year? We had, you know, Christina, you're probably better able to do that, but we've had so much discussion about, our needs, and even before we got to the regional discussion, you know, we were planning for our own needs. And when are we going to have those needs? And we really kind of pushed Christina to, well, when do we need to start something, one way or another? And that was really what led us to, you know, we need to make a decision on direction pretty, you know, ideally within this year, spilling into next, in order to be able to meet the needs that we're anticipating. I mean,
Yeah, I think,
sure you can add to that, but that was kind of our self-imposed
Well,
goal.
to get to Larry's analogy, you're gonna be at the fork of the road on 1231, and you gotta figure out, am I going this way or this way, as I understand. In order to be able to provide what our
Yeah.
customers are gonna need timely, you
And
gotta
there's
make
just a
decisions.
lot.
We've had that conversation for 6 years.
yeah, but we also just authorized 2 new data centers, and we're supporting that. That's the equivalent of 10,000 people.
Right.
And so the timeline that we had originally is now moved up. And it takes, I came from a place that took a decade to get a plant constructed and all the pieces put together. You're at least 4 to 5 years from the time you say go, without any hurdles, legal hurdles or whatever, to get that drop of water where it needs to go. And so we can't, well, it may not be the end of the year, okay, but when is it? And we've got to move forward, because then we're all going to look bad when we don't have enough water.
but you're still voting to go forward to decide whether or not you're gonna enter into discussions and explore
Right.
regionalizing. It's far from over at that
The
point.
direction.
You could get a month down the road,
It's a
2 months
direction.
down the road, 3 months down the road, public input, and go, this isn't gonna work.
And
We're
then
out.
you're just 6 months behind, but you have to move forward at some point.
And I can
And
tell
the
you,
2080 is gonna be, to the lawyers in the room, it's gonna be a lawyer's dream or nightmare, because it will just go on and on and on.